Charleston, South Carolina, 1829. The cobblestone streets glistened with morning dew as the sun's first light cast long shadows across Magnolia Plantation. The grand white columns of the main house stood like sentinels against the backdrop of sprawling oak trees draped in Spanish moss. Behind this facade of southern gentility lurked a darkness that would soon consume the Blackwood family. Colonel James Blackwood was a man of considerable means and reputation. His cotton plantation yielded fortunes that afforded his wife, Eleanor, a life of luxury few women in Charleston could rival. Their three-story mansion on the Ashley River served as both home and statement, a testament to the colonel's success built upon the backs of over 100 enslaved souls. Eleanor Blackwood moved through the morning ritual with practiced grace, her slender fingers adjusting the pearl combs in her chestnut hair. At 32, she retained the beauty that had once made her the belle of Charleston, though years of secret sorrow had etched fine lines around her eyes. She stared at her reflection in the silver-backed mirror, barely recognizing the woman who gazed back. "Mercy will be up shortly to help with your corset, ma'am," said Abigail, the house servant responsible for managing the Blackwood household staff. Eleanor nodded absently, her thoughts elsewhere. "And Isaac? Has he returned from town?" "Yes, ma'am. The colonel had him whipped for being late. He's recovering in the quarters." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the hairbrush. "I see. Thank you, Abigail." When the door closed, Eleanor allowed her composure to crumble. Isaac Turner had been purchased by the colonel 5 years earlier. An educated man who had learned to read despite the laws forbidding it, Isaac managed the colonel's correspondence and accounts, a position that placed him in frequent proximity to Eleanor. What had begun as simple kindness on her part had evolved into something forbidden, something that would destroy them both if discovered. Not romance. Eleanor was no fool, but friendship. In Isaac, she had found an unexpected confidant, someone whose intelligence and dignity remained unbroken despite the colonel's cruelty. And in her, Isaac had found a fragile ally in a house of horrors. The dinner party that evening proceeded like countless others before it. The colonel held court among Charleston's elite, discussing politics and cotton prices, while servants moved silently around the room, invisible to those they served. Eleanor played her role flawlessly, smiling at appropriate moments, refilling glasses, directing the flow of conversation with practiced charm. "The abolitionists grow bolder by the day," declared Judge Thornton, swirling brandy in his crystal glass. "Just last week a pamphlet was discovered in one of my own house servants' quarters." "Dangerous times," the colonel agreed, his face flushed with alcohol. "We must remain vigilant against such influences." "Indeed," added Reverend Porter, whose family owned 3 plantations outside Charleston, "though we must remember our Christian duty to guide these poor souls. The burden God has placed upon us as masters is not merely one of ownership, but of stewardship." Eleanor fought to keep her expression neutral. The hypocrisy of these men, standing in her dining room quoting scripture to justify their brutality, made her stomach turn. She excused herself, claiming a headache, and retreated to her private sitting room on the 2nd floor. Through the window, she could see the slave quarters, simple wooden structures where human beings were packed like cargo, where Isaac now lay wounded for the crime of being 10 minutes late with the colonel's mail. A plan that had been forming in her mind for months suddenly crystallized with terrifying clarity. She would free Isaac. Not through legal manumission. The colonel would never consent to releasing his most valuable house slave, but through deception and flight. The consequences would be severe if discovered. But Eleanor had long ago stopped fearing her husband's wrath. Some sins, she had come to believe, were worth eternal damnation. The opportunity came 3 weeks later when the colonel announced a business trip to Savannah that would keep him away for 10 days. Eleanor moved quickly, reaching out to an old school friend whose husband captained a merchant vessel bound for Boston. "Isaac," she whispered during one of their clandestine meetings in the library, where he organized the colonel's accounts. "I can arrange passage for you on Captain Miller's ship. You'll need to be at the North Dock by midnight this Sunday." Isaac's dark eyes widened. "Mrs. Blackwood, you cannot. The risk is mine to take," she interrupted. "I've secured false papers declaring you a free man of color, employed as my deceased cousin's valet. I've arranged for money to help you establish yourself in Massachusetts." "Why would you do this?" His voice trembled. Eleanor looked away. "Because I cannot bear to watch another flogging. Because what happens on this plantation is an abomination. Because you are a man, Isaac, not property." The plan was set in motion with painstaking care. Eleanor arranged for Isaac to deliver a message to a fictional business associate on Sunday afternoon, a task that would provide cover for his initial departure. By the time his absence was noted, he would be miles out to sea. What Eleanor could not have anticipated was the arrival of her husband's younger brother, Major Thomas Blackwood, one day before the colonel's expected return. The major had a reputation for cruelty that exceeded even his brother's, and his unexpected presence at Magnolia Plantation threatened to unravel everything. "Sister-in-law," the major greeted her with a cold kiss on the cheek. "James mentioned nothing of my visit. How unlike him to keep secrets." His eyes, the same steel grey as the colonel's, held something predatory. "The colonel has been in Savannah these past 9 days," Eleanor explained, maintaining her composure. "He's expected back tomorrow. We shall prepare the East guest room for you immediately." The major smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "No need for such formality. I'll stay in my usual quarters." He snapped his fingers, summoning a servant. "Have my trunks brought up, and send that educated Negro to my room, the one who keeps the books. I have letters to dictate." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. "I'm afraid Isaac is indisposed. He's on an errand for me in town, and won't return until late this evening." "Then he'll attend me first thing tomorrow," the major replied, his tone brooking no argument. That night, Eleanor lay awake in her bedroom, listening to the sounds of the plantation settling into darkness. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 11, then past. In 30 minutes, Isaac would make his way to the North Dock, where Captain Miller's first mate would be waiting. If all went according to plan, by dawn he would be sailing toward freedom. Eleanor slipped from her bed and changed into a simple dark dress. She moved silently through the house, avoiding the creaking floorboards she had memorized over years of midnight wanderings. Outside, the air was heavy with humidity, the scent of jasmine almost overpowering. She needed to warn Isaac about the major's arrival and his request for a meeting. If Isaac failed to appear the next morning, suspicions would be raised immediately, perhaps triggering a search before the ship could clear Charleston harbor. The path to the slave quarters was well-worn but treacherous in the darkness. Eleanor carried a small lantern, shielded to emit only enough light to prevent her from stumbling. The night watchman, old Samuel, was predictable in his rounds and easily avoided. The quarters were silent as Eleanor approached. The small cabin at the far end housed the house servants, including Isaac. She tapped softly on the wooden door. No response. She tapped again, slightly louder. The door creaked open, revealing not Isaac but Abigail, her eyes wide with shock. "Mrs. Blackwood! I need to speak with Isaac," Eleanor whispered urgently. Abigail's expression shifted from surprise to something unreadable. "He ain't here, ma'am. Left about an hour ago with a bundle." Relief washed over Eleanor. Isaac had departed early. A wise precaution. "If anyone asks after him tomorrow, say nothing of this. Say only that he was sent on an errand by me." Abigail nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. But what?" "Major Blackwood was asking about Isaac earlier, after you retired. He seemed interested in his whereabouts." A chill ran down Eleanor's spine. "What exactly did he ask?" "Whether Isaac had access to your private correspondence. Whether he ever spoke of northern sympathies." Abigail hesitated. "Whether you and he were ever alone together." The implications were clear. Someone had been watching, reporting back to the family. The Major's unexpected visit was no coincidence. Eleanor fought to control her breathing. "Thank you for telling me, Abigail. Remember, you know nothing of Isaac's departure." As she turned to leave, Abigail caught her sleeve. "Mrs. Blackwood, there's something else. Before he left, Isaac asked me to give you this." She pressed a small, folded paper into Eleanor's palm. By the dim light of her lantern, Eleanor read the carefully penned words. "Mrs. Blackwood, I cannot accept the freedom you offer when it comes at such risk to yourself. Forgive me, but I have made arrangements of my own. By the time you read this, I will be traveling north through different means. Know that your kindness shall never be forgotten." With eternal gratitude, Isaac Turner. Eleanor crushed the note in her fist. Foolish, noble man. Whatever arrangements Isaac had made would be far more dangerous than the relatively safe passage she had secured. The Underground Railroad, while growing in scope, remained perilous, especially for a man as recognizable as Isaac. As she made her way back to the main house, a flicker of movement caught her eye. A figure stood silhouetted against the pale moonlight, watching from the second-floor window of the guest room, the Major's window. Whether he had observed her return from the slave quarters was impossible to know, but the possibility sent terror coursing through her veins. Eleanor barely slept that night, her mind racing with contingency plans. By morning, she had composed herself enough to face whatever accusations might come. She dressed carefully, selecting a conservative green silk gown that highlighted her position as the plantation mistress. Breakfast was served on the veranda, where the Major sat reading yesterday's newspaper. He looked up as Eleanor approached, his expression revealing nothing. "Good morning, Thomas. I trust you slept well." "Like the dead," he replied, setting aside the paper. "Though I find the Charleston climate disagreeably humid." They exchanged pleasantries about the weather, the condition of the cotton fields, mutual acquaintances in Richmond, where the Major now resided. No mention of Isaac, no accusation of midnight wanderings. Perhaps Eleanor dared to hope she had escaped detection. That hope was shattered when the Major casually remarked, "I shall require Isaac's assistance immediately after breakfast. Those letters won't write themselves." Before Eleanor could formulate a response, the household was thrown into chaos by the arrival of a rider from town, one of the Colonel's business associates, his horse lathered with sweat from hard riding. "Major Blackwood," the man called, dismounting hastily, "there's been an incident at the docks. A slave was caught attempting to board the Northern Star bound for Boston. Papers were discovered, forgeries declaring him a free man." The blood froze in Eleanor's veins. Indeed, the Major's voice remained calm, though his eyes gleamed with interest. "And this slave, does he belong to my brother's plantation?" "No, sir," the rider replied. "He claims to be property of the Thompson estate upriver. But there's more. He was carrying a letter that implicates someone from this household in arranging his passage." Eleanor gripped the edge of her chair, knuckles white against the polished mahogany. The name Thompson meant nothing to her. This wasn't Isaac. But the mention of a letter, of someone from Magnolia Plantation being implicated, sent waves of dread through her body. "How curious," the Major said, his gaze sliding toward Eleanor. "And who, pray tell, is named in this letter?" The messenger lowered his voice. "A house slave, sir. One called Isaac Turner." The Major's eyebrows rose fractionally. "My brother's bookkeeper? Most interesting. And where is this fugitive now?" "Detained at the magistrate's office, awaiting identification. Sheriff Caldwell requests your presence, as the Colonel's representative." The Major rose, straightening his waistcoat. "Of course, I shall accompany you directly." He turned to Eleanor, offering a small bow. "It seems my letters must wait, sister-in-law. Duty calls." As they departed, Eleanor fought to maintain her composure. The situation had spiraled beyond her worst fears. Not only was Isaac missing, possibly already captured elsewhere or still attempting his escape through unknown means, but now Another enslaved person had been caught with incriminating evidence connecting back to Isaac, and, by extension, to her. She retreated to her private sitting room, mind racing. If Isaac had rejected her plan, choosing instead to escape via the Underground Railroad, why would his name appear in a letter carried by another fugitive? The pieces didn't fit together, unless a cold realization dawned. Isaac hadn't abandoned her plan entirely. He'd adapted it. Knowing the risk was too great for him to take the captain's ship directly, he had arranged for a decoy, someone to draw attention while he escaped via an alternate route. It was brilliant and horrifying. The captured man would face severe punishment, while Isaac gained precious time to distance himself from Charleston. But how had Isaac managed such a complex arrangement from his restricted position? And who was the unfortunate soul now bearing the consequences of their actions? Eleanor paced the room, debating her options. She could confess her role immediately, potentially sparing the captured man some punishment while destroying herself in the process. Or she could remain silent, pray that Isaac had covered his tracks adequately, and hope that no direct evidence linked her to the escape attempt. Neither choice offered comfort. Both carried the stain of moral compromise. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Abigail stood at the door, her expression grave. "Mrs. Blackwood, there's something you should know." She glanced nervously over her shoulder before continuing. "The slave they caught at the docks. His name is Solomon. He works the fields at the Thompson place, but his sister Mercy serves here." Mercy, Eleanor's personal maid, the girl who helped with her corset each morning, who arranged her hair for dinner parties, who had access to Eleanor's private chambers and correspondence. "Where is Mercy now?" Eleanor asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Gone, ma'am. Left before dawn. No one's seen her since." The pieces began falling into place with terrifying clarity. Isaac had not only arranged a decoy, he had secured an accomplice, and now 2 more souls were imperiled because of Eleanor's initial plan. "If I may speak freely, ma'am." Abigail hesitated, twisting her hands in her apron. "Please do." "The field hands are saying the Major brought slave catchers with him from Virginia, that he came looking for someone specific." Abigail's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "They say he's been watching this plantation for months through eyes and ears of his own. A spy." The Major had planted someone among the house staff, perhaps even Abigail herself, to observe and report back. But why? What did he suspect? Before Eleanor could question further, the sound of horses in the driveway signaled the Major's return. She moved to the window, watching as he dismounted, accompanied by 3 rough-looking men whose appearance marked them as professional slave catchers. Eleanor descended to the entrance hall, determined to learn what had transpired at the magistrate's office. The Major entered, removing his gloves with deliberate slowness. "Thomas? What news?" He regarded her with cool assessment. The fugitive confessed under questioning. He claims Isaac Turner provided him with forged papers and instructions for escape, promising that others would soon follow the same route. Others. Eleanor kept her voice neutral despite her racing heart. "Indeed, it seems your bookkeeper harbored grand ambitions of leading a mass exodus from Charleston's plantations." The Major signaled to a servant for brandy. "The magistrate has issued a warrant for Isaac's arrest. These gentlemen," he gestured to the men now entering the foyer, "will assist in tracking him down." "But surely Isaac is simply on an errand as I mentioned," Eleanor protested. "There must be some mistake." The Major's smile never reached his eyes. "A curious errand that requires him to empty his quarters of personal belongings and provisions. The slave quarters were searched an hour ago, sister-in-law. Isaac's preparations for flight were discovered." Eleanor felt the walls closing in around her. "I see. Do you?" The Major accepted a glass of brandy, studying her over its rim. "I wonder if you truly do, Eleanor. I wonder if you comprehend the gravity of what has transpired under your husband's roof during his absence." The accusation hung in the air between them. Eleanor met his gaze unflinchingly, years of performing as the perfect southern wife serving her now. I comprehend only that a valued house servant has apparently betrayed my husband's trust. Beyond that, I leave matters in your capable hands, Thomas. The Major's eyes narrowed. As you should, though I find myself curious about certain details. He withdrew a folded paper from his coat pocket. This was found among the fugitive's possessions. A letter addressed to Isaac Turner, written in a hand that appears feminine. Eleanor's mouth went dry. She had written to Isaac only once, months earlier, a brief note of condolence when his mother, also enslaved at Magnolia Plantation, had died from fever. The letter had contained nothing incriminating, merely expressions of Christian sympathy, but its existence alone could fuel suspicion. Many of the house servants receive instruction in reading and writing, she said carefully. It's a practical necessity for those who manage household accounts and correspondence. Indeed, yet this particular letter contains phrases of a rather personal nature. He unfolded the paper, clearing his throat. Your suffering has not gone unnoticed. Take heart in knowing that earthly bondage is temporary, while the freedom of the soul is eternal. Curious sentiments from mistress to slave, wouldn't you agree? Relief washed through Eleanor. This was not her handwriting, not her letter. Someone else had written to Isaac, someone who shared her sympathies, but whose identity remained unknown. I did not write those words, Thomas. No? He refolded the letter. Perhaps not. Yet the sentiment itself is troubling, the kind of abolitionist rhetoric that inflames passions and disrupts the natural order. I hardly think Christian comfort qualifies as abolitionist rhetoric, Eleanor countered, finding strength in righteous indignation. Even Reverend Porter speaks of spiritual freedom in his sermons. Reverend Porter understands the distinction between spiritual metaphor and dangerous literalism. The Major drained his glass. But we digress. The hunt for your bookkeeper begins immediately. These men will require quarters for the duration of their stay. The slave catchers were accommodated in the overseer's cottage, while the Major retained his room in the main house. Eleanor, feeling increasingly like a prisoner in her own home, withdrew to her chambers, ostensibly to rest before dinner, but actually to think. Isaac had been gone for nearly 24 hours now. If his plan had succeeded, he would be well north of Charleston, following whatever route the Underground Railroad had arranged. Solomon's capture and Mercy's disappearance complicated matters, but neither necessarily compromised Isaac's escape. The greater immediate danger was to Eleanor herself. The Major clearly harbored suspicions about her involvement, though he lacked concrete evidence. The Colonel's return tomorrow would add another layer of scrutiny. If both brothers united against her, Eleanor's position would become untenable. Night fell over Magnolia Plantation, bringing with it a violent summer storm. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder shook the foundations of the house. Eleanor sat in darkness, listening to the elements rage, while a similar storm brewed inside her. A soft scratching at her door startled her from her thoughts. She opened it cautiously to find Abigail, soaking wet and trembling. "You must come, ma'am," she whispered urgently. "They found him." "Isaac?" Eleanor's heart plummeted. "No, ma'am. The overseer, Mr. Bates, dead in the cotton fields. Throat cut." The news spread through the plantation like wildfire, despite the storm. Arlen Bates had been a brutal overseer, notorious for his heavy hand with the whip and his propensity for visiting the women's quarters after dark. Few would mourn his passing, but his murder, for murder it surely was, changed everything. The Major organized the house slaves and field hands into the dining room, where they stood dripping rainwater onto the polished floors. His face was thunderous as he paced before them. "This plantation has harbored a murderer," he announced, voice cutting through the sound of rain hammering against the windows. Harlan Bates was found with his throat slit from ear to ear, his body deliberately placed where it would be discovered. He paused, eyes scanning the assembled faces. This was no act of desperation or momentary passion. This was a message. Eleanor stood at the periphery, watching the scene unfold with mounting dread. The slave's expressions revealed nothing, a practiced blankness honed through generations of survival. "Those responsible will be found and punished," the Major continued. "Until then, no one leaves their quarters after sundown. Any slave found outside after dark will be shot on sight." He dismissed them with a wave, ordering the house servants to prepare coffee in the study. When only Eleanor remained, he turned to her with cold fury. "This is the consequence of coddling them, sister-in-law. This is what your Christian compassion has wrought." Eleanor matched his gaze. "A man has been murdered, Thomas. Speculation serves no purpose until the facts are known." "The facts?" He laughed bitterly. "The facts are clear to anyone with eyes to see. Your precious bookkeeper has graduated from forgery to murder. You have no evidence linking Isaac to this crime. The timing is damning enough, but rest assured, evidence will be found." The Major moved closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "And when it is, every hand that aided him will be held equally accountable, regardless of station or family connection." Eleanor refused to be intimidated. "Then I suggest you focus your energies on finding the actual culprit, rather than making veiled threats against your brother's wife." Their confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Caldwell, summoned from town despite the raging storm. The sheriff was a pragmatic man with no particular love for the plantation elite, but he understood the political realities of his position. "Major Blackwood, Mrs. Blackwood," he greeted them, removing his dripping hat. "I came as soon as I received your message." The three relocated to the colonel's study, where Eleanor ordered coffee and brandy. The sheriff accepted both, gratefully, warming his hands around the steaming cup. "I've examined the body," he began without preamble. "Clean cut, single stroke from behind. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. A planned execution," the Major concluded. "So it would appear." The sheriff sipped his coffee. "Though I find the timing curious. Why kill Bates now? Why not any time in the past years of his employment?" "Because it serves a purpose now," the Major replied. "It creates chaos, diverts attention from the fugitive slaves, perhaps even inspires others to similar acts of rebellion." The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. "You mentioned in your message that you suspect this connects to the escaped bookkeeper and the slave captured at the docks yesterday. They are surely linked. This plantation has become the center of an organized attempt at mass escape, possibly even insurrection." Eleanor could remain silent no longer. "That is pure speculation, Thomas. One murdered overseer and 2 missing slaves hardly constitute an insurrection." 3, the sheriff corrected. "Another was reported missing from the Campbell plantation this morning. Young woman, apparently vanished during the night." The Major seized on this information. "You see, it spreads like contagion. First your bookkeeper with his literacy and ideas above his station, then others follow his example. Or," Eleanor suggested, "these people seized opportunities to escape brutal conditions, opportunities that arose independently." "A naive perspective," the Major dismissed her. "Sheriff, I trust you will coordinate with my men in searching the surrounding areas. The rain will slow their progress, but it will also hamper the fugitives." The sheriff finished his brandy. "I'll do my duty, Major, but I won't stir up panic without cause. Charleston remembers the Denmark Vesey affair all too well. False accusations and mass hysteria benefit no one." "Caution is warranted," Eleanor agreed, earning a sharp look from the Major. After the sheriff departed, Eleanor excused herself, claiming exhaustion from the day's events. In truth, she needed solitude to process the rapidly deteriorating situation. Harlan Bates' murder changed the dynamics dramatically. What had begun as a carefully orchestrated escape, one that might have been discovered but contained as an isolated incident, now carried the taint of violence. The authorities would pursue Isaac and the others with redoubled vigor, and the consequences of capture would be far more severe. And what of her own position? The Major clearly suspected her involvement, though he lacked proof. The Colonel's return tomorrow would force her to navigate an even more treacherous path between the brothers. James Blackwood was possessive of what he considered his property, both his slaves and his wife. Any suggestion that Eleanor had aided Isaac's escape would trigger a rage that might not distinguish between the two categories of possession. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind cycling through scenarios, each more dire than the last. The storm continued unabated, as if nature itself reflected the turmoil gripping Magnolia Plantation. Morning brought no reprieve. The rain had stopped, but grey clouds hung low over the plantation, threatening to unleash another deluge. Eleanor dressed without assistance, Mercy's absence a pointed reminder of how quickly one's world could change. She had just finished pinning her hair when a commotion erupted downstairs. Voices raised in alarm, footsteps hurrying across the entrance hall. Eleanor descended to find the Major barking orders to the slave catchers, who appeared to have just returned from a night of searching. "What's happened?" she demanded. The Major turned, his expression grim. "Another murder. The magistrate's clerk was found dead in his office this morning, throat cut in the exact same manner as Bates." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. "That's impossible. Who would—" "The same person who killed Bates," the Major cut her off. "And for the same reason, to destroy evidence. The clerk was responsible for documenting the interrogation of the slave captured at the docks. His notes, along with the forged freedom papers and the letter implicating your bookkeeper, are missing. The implications were staggering. Not one but two murders, executed with precision, targeting individuals directly connected to Isaac's case and eliminating evidence that could identify accomplices. This is the work of an educated mind," the Major continued, his gaze boring into Eleanor. "Someone who understands the value of documentation, who knows how to systematically remove obstacles and cover their tracks." Before Eleanor could respond, a rider appeared at the end of the driveway, the Colonel's personal groom, signaling James Blackwood's imminent return. The Major smiled thinly. "Perfect timing. My brother should find this homecoming most illuminating." Colonel Blackwood's arrival brought a flurry of activity. Servants rushed to unload his trunks, prepare his bath, and arrange a welcome meal despite the household's state of disarray. The Colonel himself appeared weary from travel, but alert to the unusual atmosphere that greeted him. "James," the Major stepped forward to embrace his brother, "your return is most fortuitous. We have a situation that requires your immediate attention." Eleanor watched as her husband's expression darkened while the Major outlined recent events: Isaac's disappearance, Solomon's capture at the docks, Mercy's flight, Bates' murder, and now the killing of the magistrate's clerk. With each new detail, the Colonel's gaze flicked toward Eleanor, his suspicion palpable. When the Major finished his account, the Colonel dismissed the servants with a sharp gesture. The three Blackwoods remained alone in the study, the ticking of the grandfather clock marking the heavy silence. "Wife," the Colonel finally spoke, his voice deceptively soft. "What do you know of these matters?" Eleanor had prepared for this moment during her sleepless night. "I know only what has been reported to me, James. Isaac was sent on an errand the day before your return. He did not come back. Everything else, the murders, the other disappearances, came as a complete shock." "An errand," the Colonel repeated. "Authorized by whom?" "By me," Eleanor admitted. "To deliver correspondence to your business associate, Mr. Harrington." "Nessum. Curious," the Colonel mused. "As I met with Harrington in Savannah 3 days ago, he mentioned nothing about expecting correspondence from my household." The trap sprung shut with devastating efficiency. Eleanor had gambled, selecting a name she believed would be unverifiable in the short term. She had not anticipated her husband's direct contact with Harrington. "I must have misunderstood his instructions," she attempted to recover. "Perhaps it was another of your associates." "Enough lies," the Colonel snapped, his facade of civility evaporating. Thomas has shared his suspicions with me through correspondence these past months. Your sympathies, your private conversations with the house slaves, your reading materials, all have been noted and documented. The revelation that the brothers had been communicating about her, that she had been under surveillance within her own home for months, struck Eleanor like a physical blow. "You've had me watched, your own wife." "With good reason, it seems," the colonel replied coldly. "Now you will tell me everything you know about Isaac Turner's escape, including any other parties involved. Omit nothing, or I shall be forced to employ methods of questioning typically reserved for those of lower station." The threat hung in the air, its implications clear. Eleanor had heard the screams from the small outbuilding where recalcitrant slaves were questioned by Bates. The idea that her husband would subject her to similar treatment seemed impossible, yet the coldness in his eyes suggested otherwise. "James," the major interjected, his tone reasonable, "perhaps a more measured approach. Eleanor is, after all, your wife, and a Blackwood by marriage. Her actions, while reprehensible, should be handled with appropriate discretion." "Ita." The colonel's jaw worked as he considered his brother's advice. "You have one opportunity to redeem yourself, Eleanor. One chance to demonstrate your loyalty to this family and the principles upon which our way of life is built. Assist us in recapturing Isaac Turner and identifying his co-conspirators, and perhaps I might be persuaded to show mercy." Eleanor stood before her husband and brother-in-law, acutely aware that this moment would define the remainder of her life. Whatever choice she made now would echo through the years to come, shaping not only her fate, but the fates of Isaac, Mercy, and countless others caught in this expanding web. "James," she began, carefully measuring her words, "I have been your wife for 15 years. In that time, have I ever given you reason to doubt my loyalty?" "Loyalty," he scoffed. "Is that what you call secretly meeting with a slave? Spending hours alone with him in my library under the pretense of reviewing household accounts?" "Those meetings were nothing more than what they appeared," Eleanor countered, though she knew the partial lie would not save her. "Isaac Turner is an educated man whose skills served this plantation well." "An educated slave is a dangerous slave," the colonel retorted, "as events have proven conclusively." The major stepped forward, his manner conciliatory. "Eleanor, consider your position carefully. 2 men are dead. The authorities are searching for connections between these murders and the escaped slaves. If evidence should emerge linking you to any aspect of this affair—" He left the implication hanging. Eleanor understood the choice before her with perfect clarity. She could save herself by betraying Isaac, providing information about his plans, his contacts, the route he might have taken north. Or she could maintain her silence and face the consequences. Public disgrace at minimum, criminal charges at worst. But there was a third option, one that might buy time while revealing nothing of value. "I knew nothing of Isaac's plans to escape," she said firmly, "but I will admit to a friendship that exceeded the proper boundaries between mistress and slave. I was lonely." She allowed her voice to falter, playing to the men's expectations of female weakness. "James, your business affairs keep you traveling for weeks at a time. The isolation of plantation life, the burden of managing the household in your absence. I found comfort in conversation with someone whose intelligence matched my own." The colonel's expression remained stony, but something shifted in his posture, a barely perceptible relaxation. Eleanor had struck the right note, appealing to his vanity by suggesting that she, a delicate southern lady, had simply succumbed to emotional frailty in his absence. This friendship, he pressed, did it extend to helping him plan his escape? "No," Eleanor answered truthfully. "I had no knowledge of his intentions until he failed to return from his errand. Whatever plans Isaac made, whatever connections he formed with others, he kept hidden from me." The major studied her skeptically. "Yet the timing is remarkably convenient. Your husband absent, Isaac disappearing the day before his expected return. the subsequent murders eliminating evidence and witnesses. Circumstances that suggest Isaac's careful planning, not my involvement, Eleanor responded. Had I orchestrated his escape, would I have done so at a time guaranteed to cast suspicion on myself? The logic of this argument seemed to give both men pause. The colonel poured himself a generous measure of bourbon, consuming it in a single swallow, before pouring another. "If what you say is true," he finally said, "then you can have no objection to assisting in his recapture. Your friendship gives you insight into his mind, his patterns of thought. Where would he go? Who would he trust?" Eleanor felt the trap closing around her again. Any information she provided would either be a lie, easily discovered and further damning, or would genuinely endanger Isaac. "I can tell you only what I observed," she said carefully. "Isaac spoke occasionally of relatives in Philadelphia. He mentioned once that his father had been sold to a plantation near Savannah. Beyond that, I know nothing of his personal connections." The colonel exchanged glances with his brother. "Philadelphia, that aligns with intelligence about the Underground Railroad's northern routes. And Savannah provides a convenient alternative path," the major added, "south instead of north, where pursuit would be less expected." Eleanor maintained a neutral expression, though inwardly she prayed that Isaac had indeed chosen a completely different route. She had no idea whether he had family in either location. The details were fabrications designed to send any pursuers in the wrong direction. "Sheriff Caldwell should be informed immediately," the colonel decided. "Dispatches must be sent to authorities in both cities." The major nodded. "I'll ride into Charleston personally. This development warrants direct communication rather than messengers who might be intercepted." As he departed, the colonel turned his attention back to Eleanor. "You will remain in your chambers until further notice. Meals will be brought to you. You will speak with no one, not servants, not visitors, no one, without my express permission. James, surely such isolation is unnecessary." "It is necessary," he cut her off, "and lenient compared to what awaits you should I discover you have lied to me again." His eyes hardened. "The law provides certain remedies for wives who betray their husband's trust. Confinement to an asylum for hysteria and moral derangement would be entirely justified under the circumstances." The threat silenced Eleanor more effectively than any physical intimidation could have. She had heard whispered stories of inconvenient wives dispatched to such institutions, never to return to society. The colonel, with his connections and wealth, could certainly arrange such a fate for her with minimal difficulty. "I understand," she said quietly. "I doubt that you do," he replied, "but you will. You may retire to your chambers now." Eleanor's room quickly transformed from sanctuary to prison. The door remained unlocked. Such an overt action would have raised questions among the household staff. But a house slave was stationed in the hallway outside, ostensibly attending to cleaning duties, but obviously monitoring her movements. From her window, Eleanor watched as riders departed in various directions, carrying dispatches to neighboring plantations and towns. The search for Isaac and the other fugitives was expanding, resources being mobilized across the region. How could one man, even one as resourceful as Isaac, evade such a massive effort? As afternoon faded into evening, Eleanor tried to imagine Isaac's journey. Was he traveling by night, hiding during daylight hours? Had he found sympathizers willing to shelter him, or was he moving alone through wilderness areas, avoiding human contact entirely? And what of Mercy and the others who had fled? Were they together, supporting each other, or had they scattered to maximize their chances of escape? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Abigail entered with a dinner tray, her expression carefully blank in the presence of the hallway guard. "Your evening meal, Mrs. Blackwood," she announced formally, setting the tray on a small table. "Thank you, Abigail." Eleanor noticed a folded newspaper beside the plate. "Did the colonel authorize this reading material?" "Yes, ma'am. He specifically requested you be provided with today's Charleston Mercury." Once Abigail departed, Eleanor unfolded the newspaper, immediately understanding her husband's intentions. The front page carried bold headlines about the murders of Harlan Bates and Timothy Wilson, the magistrate's clerk. The articles connected both killings to a growing conspiracy among slaves and northern agitators, reporting that authorities had compelling evidence linking the crimes to recent escape attempts. Most disturbing was the inclusion of a detailed physical description of Isaac, accompanied by an offer of $500 for his capture, dead or alive. Similar descriptions and rewards followed for Mercy and two other slaves Eleanor didn't recognize, though the bounties for them were considerably lower. The message was clear. The colonel wanted Eleanor to understand the public narrative being constructed, the machinery of justice and vengeance now in motion. Whatever her private feelings about Isaac's escape, she could no longer harbor illusions about his chances of success. The newspaper also contained a smaller article noting unusual movements among slave populations across 3 counties, with reports of clandestine gatherings and whispered conversations that ceased when whites approached. The piece concluded with a warning to plantation owners to increase security and vigilance against the infectious spread of rebellious sentiment. Eleanor set the paper aside, her appetite gone. The situation had escalated beyond anything she had anticipated when first conceiving her plan to help Isaac escape. What had begun as an act of personal conscience, a private rebellion against the system that had corrupted her life and her husband's soul, now threatened to engulf the entire region in paranoia and violence. Sleep came fitfully that night, broken by nightmares of pursuit and capture. In one particularly vivid dream, Eleanor found herself running alongside Isaac through dark woods, slave catchers and their hounds close behind. As they reached a river, the boundary between captivity and freedom, Isaac turned to her with an expression of profound sorrow. "You cannot cross," he told her. "This journey is not yours to complete." She woke with tears streaming down her face, the dream's message resonating with uncomfortable truth. Eleanor could assist, encourage, provide resources, but she could never fully understand or share in the struggle for freedom. Her privilege, her whiteness, her position as a Blackwood separated her irrevocably from those she sought to help. Dawn brought more activity to the plantation. From her window, Eleanor observed the arrival of additional slave catchers, their horses and tracking hounds milling in the courtyard as they conferred with the colonel. The search was intensifying, resources being concentrated as leads developed. Mid-morning, the major returned from Charleston, accompanied by Sheriff Caldwell and a man Eleanor didn't recognize. A tall, severe-looking individual in a black coat whose bearing suggested authority beyond the local jurisdiction. An hour later, Abigail arrived with a message. Eleanor's presence was required in the colonel's study immediately. The hallway guard escorted her downstairs, maintaining a respectful distance but watching her closely. Eleanor smoothed her skirts and composed her features into a mask of calm dignity before entering the study. 4 men awaited her: the colonel, the major, Sheriff Caldwell, and the stranger who stood examining the bookshelves with apparent interest. The colonel gestured for Eleanor to sit in a straight-backed chair, positioned conspicuously in the center of the room. "Eleanor," he began without preamble, "this is Mr. Davis from the Federal Marshal's office in Washington. He has questions regarding the recent disturbances." The marshal turned from the bookshelves, fixing Eleanor with a penetrating gaze. "Mrs. Blackwood, I understand you had frequent contact with the fugitive Isaac Turner during his employment in this household." "Isaac Turner managed my husband's correspondence and accounts," Eleanor replied carefully. "Our interactions were primarily related to household business." "Primarily," the marshal noted, "but not exclusively." Eleanor felt the trap being laid. "We occasionally discussed books. Isaac was permitted use of certain volumes in my husband's library to improve his understanding of mathematics and commerce." "Books." The marshal's tone suggested skepticism. Were these discussions supervised? Not always, Eleanor admitted. The Colonel's business interests require extensive documentation. I often worked with Isaac on household accounts while my husband was traveling. Sheriff Caldwell cleared his throat. Mrs. Blackwood, forgive the directness of my question, but did these discussions ever touch on politics, current events, the abolition movement, perhaps? Certainly not, Eleanor responded firmly. Such topics would be entirely inappropriate. The Marshal retrieved a folder from the Colonel's desk, removing several sheets of paper. We have testimony suggesting otherwise. A house servant named Abigail has provided a sworn statement indicating that you and Turner engaged in numerous private conversations about Northern newspapers, political debates in Congress, and most damning, the operations of the so-called Underground Railroad. Eleanor felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her. Abigail, who had seemed sympathetic, who had warned her about the Major's suspicions, who had delivered Isaac's farewell note, had betrayed her, or had been coerced into doing so. That is absolutely false, Eleanor declared, fighting to keep her voice steady. Abigail has either misunderstood innocent conversations or been pressured into fabricating these claims. The Marshal consulted another document. She describes with remarkable specificity a conversation from February of this year, following the congressional debates on the Fugitive Slave Act. According to her testimony, you expressed to Turner that the proposed legislation was, and I quote, an abomination before God and man, a stain upon the Constitution that future generations would view with horror and shame. The words, her exact words, spoken in a moment of unguarded outrage after reading newspaper accounts of the debates, hung in the air like an indictment. Eleanor had indeed made that statement to Isaac, believing they were alone in the library, but Abigail had apparently been present, listening, remembering. Mrs. Blackwood, Sheriff Caldwell interjected, his tone almost gentle. These are serious allegations. Aiding a fugitive slave is a criminal offense. Conspiracy to commit murder, which is where this investigation now leads, carries the most severe penalties. Murder? Eleanor's shock was genuine. I had absolutely nothing to do with those killings. Perhaps not directly, the Marshal conceded, but the evidence suggests a coordinated effort to facilitate Turner's escape and eliminate those who might prevent it. If you provided information, resources, or moral support to Turner knowing his intentions, you share culpability for the consequences. The Colonel, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke. Eleanor, the situation grows more dire by the hour. If you have information about Turner's whereabouts or accomplices, now is the time to reveal it. Your cooperation may be the only factor mitigating your involvement. Eleanor looked from face to face, recognizing the inexorable machinery closing around her. These men had already determined her guilt. They sought now only confession and information that might lead to Isaac's capture. I have told you everything I know, she said quietly. I had no knowledge of Isaac's plans to escape, nor any involvement in the murders. Whatever Abigail claims to have overheard was either innocent conversation taken out of context or deliberate fabrication. The Marshal exchanged glances with the Colonel. Perhaps more direct questioning is warranted. Questioning. Before the Colonel could respond, a commotion erupted outside, shouting, the pounding of hooves, men calling for the Colonel. The Major moved to the window, then turned with an expression of grim satisfaction. They've found something, he announced, down by the river. The study emptied quickly, the men hurrying outside to meet the returning search party. Eleanor, momentarily forgotten in the excitement, moved to the window where she could observe without being seen. A group of slave catchers had arrived, their horses lathered from hard riding. In their midst stood a bedraggled figure, a young black man Eleanor didn't recognize, his wrists bound, face bloodied from rough treatment. One of the catchers handed the Colonel a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Eleanor strained to see what was happening, but the men had moved to the far side of the courtyard, their voices too distant to discern clearly. The prisoner was taken toward the overseer's cottage, while the colonel and the others examined the contents of the bundle. Footsteps in the hallway alerted Eleanor to the return of her guard. She quickly resumed her seat, composing her features into a mask of calm indifference. The major entered first, followed by the marshal, and finally the colonel, who carried the oilcloth package. "It seems," the colonel announced, "that we have our first substantial lead." He placed the bundle on his desk, unfolding the oilcloth to reveal a small, leather-bound book, its pages water-stained but legible. "A journal," the marshal explained for Eleanor's benefit, "belonging to a known abolitionist who operates along the coastal waterways. It was recovered from a man attempting to rendezvous with a ship bound for Boston, the same ship mentioned in the forged papers found on the first captured fugitive." The major picked up the narrative. "The journal contains coded entries documenting slave movements throughout the region. More importantly, it references a contact within Magnolia Plantation, a contact identified only as the colonel's wife." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. "That's absurd. I've never communicated with any abolitionist. I don't even know any abolitionists." "The journal suggests otherwise," the marshal countered. "It describes information provided by this contact regarding plantation security, patrol schedules, and the movements of certain key personnel, including the recently deceased Mr. Bates." "A fabrication," Eleanor insisted. "Anyone could have created such a journal to cast suspicion on me." The colonel studied her with cold detachment. "The prisoner we've captured tells a different story. Under questioning, he revealed that he was to meet Turner and guide him to the coastal rendezvous point. He claims Turner spoke of assistance from the main house, assistance that made his escape possible." Eleanor recognized the strategy at work. They were constructing a narrative piece by piece, each new evidence building upon the last, creating the appearance of an overwhelming case against her. Whether the journal was genuine or manufactured for this purpose hardly mattered. Its existence, combined with Abigail's testimony and the prisoner's coerced confession, formed a chain of circumstantial evidence difficult to refute. "I want to speak with this prisoner," she demanded, grasping at the one potential flaw in their construction. "I want to hear his accusations directly." "That won't be possible," the major replied smoothly. "The man is indisposed following his questioning." The implication was clear. The prisoner had been beaten, perhaps to the point where presenting him would undermine rather than strengthen their case against Eleanor. "Then I want to see Abigail," Eleanor persisted. "If she's made these claims against me, she should state them to my face." The colonel shook his head. "Abigail has been removed to our property in Georgia for her own protection. Given the severity of her accusations and the violent nature of recent events, we deemed it prudent to ensure her safety." Every avenue of defense was being systematically closed off. Eleanor realized with growing despair that her fate had likely been determined before this interview even began. The men were not seeking truth. They were building a case. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. The marshal cleared his throat. "Normally, formal charges would be filed and you would be remanded to custody pending trial. However, given your position and the sensitive nature of these allegations, alternative arrangements have been discussed." The colonel stepped forward. "In consideration of our family's standing and to avoid public scandal, I have proposed a more discreet resolution. You will be escorted to my brother's estate in Virginia, where you will remain indefinitely under his supervision. Your condition will be attributed to nervous exhaustion and female hysteria, requiring extended rest away from society." "Imprisonment," Eleanor translated flatly. "Protection," the colonel countered, "from the consequences of your own actions." The alternative would be formal prosecution for aiding fugitive slaves and conspiracy to commit murder, charges that could result in execution given the current climate. The marshal nodded his agreement. "The colonel's proposal is unusually merciful, Mrs. Blackwood. I would strongly advise you to accept it." Eleanor understood her situation with perfect clarity. She was being offered a choice between public disgrace, followed by possible execution, or private imprisonment under the Major's control. A man whose cruelty was legendary, even among the slave-owning class. "When would I depart?" she asked, playing for time, though she had no illusions about escaping her fate. "Immediately," the colonel replied. "A carriage has already been prepared. You will be permitted to pack a single trunk of personal belongings under supervision." Eleanor nodded slowly, mind racing through possibilities, searching for options where none seemed to exist. "And if Isaac Turner is captured, what becomes of him?" The colonel's expression hardened. "That is no longer your concern. But rest assured, his punishment will be commensurate with his crimes. The deaths of Bates and Wilson demand no less. May I at least write to my sister before departing, to explain my sudden absence?" "A letter will be sent on your behalf," the Major interjected, "explaining your illness and need for specialized treatment. No direct communication will be permitted until we are certain of your rehabilitation. Complete isolation, then. No contact with the outside world, no possibility of appeal or rescue. Eleanor would simply vanish from Charleston society, remembered only as a woman whose fragile constitution had finally broken under the strain of plantation life. "Very well," she said, straightening her spine, summoning the dignity that had sustained her through 15 years of marriage to a man she had grown to despise. "I shall prepare for departure." As she rose to leave, the colonel stepped forward, lowering his voice for her ears alone. "One final opportunity, Eleanor. Tell me where Turner would go. Give me something that leads to his capture, and your confinement might be considerably more comfortable." Eleanor met his gaze unflinchingly. "I've told you everything I know, James. Isaac Turner's fate is in God's hands now, as is my own." His expression hardened. "God has precious little to do with what awaits either of you." Under the watchful eye of a house slave loyal to the colonel, Eleanor packed a small trunk with essential belongings, a few dresses, undergarments, a hairbrush, and her mother's Bible. She moved mechanically, her mind detached from the task, focused instead on analyzing her situation from every angle. The evidence against her was substantial, but largely circumstantial. Without Abigail's direct testimony, conveniently removed to Georgia, and with the unknown prisoner too indisposed to appear, the case might not withstand rigorous legal scrutiny. But Eleanor harbored no illusions about receiving due process. The Blackwood family's influence would ensure that any formal proceedings, should they occur, would be mere theatre, with the outcome predetermined. More troubling was the absolute certainty with which the colonel had arranged her transportation to Virginia. The preparations had been made before the interview, before any confession or admission of guilt. Her husband had decided her fate regardless of what defense she might offer. As she folded a shawl, Eleanor's fingers brushed against something in the pocket of her dressing gown, a small folded paper she had forgotten. With a subtle glance to ensure her guard's attention was elsewhere, she palmed the note, concealing it in her closed fist. It was Isaac's farewell message, delivered by Abigail on the night of his departure. Eleanor had intended to burn it, but in the chaos of subsequent events had simply tucked it away in her pocket. Now it represented both danger and possibly her only connection to the truth of what had transpired. When her packing was complete, Eleanor requested a moment of privacy to change into traveling clothes. The guard, a young woman named Sarah, hesitated before stepping just outside the door, leaving it partially open. In those few precious moments, Eleanor unfolded the note and read it again. "Mrs. Blackwood, I cannot accept the freedom you offer when it comes at such risk to yourself. Forgive me, but I have made arrangements of my own. By the time you read this, I will be traveling north through different means. Know that your kindness shall never be forgotten. With eternal gratitude, Isaac Turner." Below the signature, barely visible in the fading light, was a postscript Eleanor had missed in her initial reading. "Trust only the keeper of your mother's medallion." Eleanor's breath caught. Her mother's medallion, a silver locket containing a miniature portrait, had been stolen from her jewelry box 3 months earlier. She had assumed a house servant was responsible and had chosen not to report the theft, unwilling to subject the entire staff to questioning and potential punishment for what amounted to a sentimental rather than valuable loss. The keeper of the medallion. Someone within the household possessed the locket, someone Isaac trusted implicitly, someone who might now be Eleanor's only potential ally. But who? She had no time to consider the question further. Sarah returned, announcing that the carriage was ready. Eleanor tucked the note into her bodice and gathered her composure for what might be her final moments at Magnolia Plantation. The courtyard presented a somber tableau as Eleanor descended the main staircase. The colonel stood beside the waiting carriage, speaking quietly with the major and Marshal Davis. House servants lined the driveway, their expressions carefully neutral, betraying nothing of their thoughts regarding the mistress's sudden departure. Eleanor scanned their faces, searching for any indication of the keeper Isaac had referenced. Nothing. No sign, no signal, no meaningful glance. If her potential ally was among them, they maintained perfect discretion. The colonel turned as she approached, his features set in a mask of public concern. "My dear, the carriage is prepared for your journey. Dr. Mitchell has provided laudanum to ease your discomfort during travel." The fiction was being established for any witnesses. Eleanor was unwell, traveling for treatment, not being exiled in disgrace. She played her part with equal artifice. "Thank you, James. I'm certain the Virginia air will prove restorative." Her voice carried clearly to the assembled servants, establishing the narrative they would repeat when questioned about her absence. The major stepped forward, offering his arm with false solicitude. "Sister-in-law, allow me to assist you. The journey is long, but we shall ensure your comfort." Eleanor accepted his arm, maintaining the charade as he helped her into the carriage. Inside, 2 men waited, not house servants but hired guards, their expressions impassive, pistols visible at their waists. The message was clear. This was no medical journey, but a prisoner transport. The colonel leaned into the carriage, his voice low. "Remember, Eleanor, that your future comfort depends entirely on your cooperation. Should Turner be captured alive, a full confession from you regarding your involvement might yet salvage some quality of life in your confinement." "And should he elude capture?" Eleanor asked, meeting her husband's gaze directly. The colonel's smile never reached his eyes. "Then I fear your nervous condition may prove more severe than anticipated, requiring more intensive treatments." The threat hung between them, its implications clear. Eleanor would either provide evidence against Isaac or face increasingly harsh conditions under the major's supervision. "Goodbye, James," she said simply, turning away to signal the end of their conversation. The colonel stepped back, nodding to the driver. The carriage lurched forward, beginning the journey that would take Eleanor away from everything familiar into a future of controlled isolation. Through the small window, she watched Magnolia Plantation recede, its white columns and manicured grounds dissolving into the distance. She had arrived there as a bride of 17, full of romantic notions about plantation life and her handsome, worldly husband. 15 years later, she departed as a prisoner, stripped of illusions, her romantic ideals replaced by harsh understanding of the system's cruelty and her own complicity in it. The carriage traveled north along rutted roads, maintaining a steady pace that suggested urgency without drawing undue attention. The 2 guards watched Eleanor continuously, but spoke little, responding to her questions about their route with monosyllabic answers or silence. By nightfall, they had reached a small inn near the North Carolina border. One guard escorted Eleanor inside, while the other arranged for fresh horses. The innkeeper's wife, clearly intimidated by the guard's presence, showed them to a small room at the back of the establishment. "The lady is unwell," the guard explained gruffly. She requires absolute quiet and privacy. Meals will be taken in this room, and no visitors are permitted." "Of course, sir," the woman bobbed nervously. "Is there anything special the lady requires for her comfort?" "Nothing," the guard answered before Eleanor could speak. "Just privacy and silence." When they were alone, Eleanor tested her boundaries. "I would like to walk outside for fresh air before retiring." "Impossible," the guard replied flatly. "The Major's instructions were explicit. You are not to leave this room except in my company, and only for absolute necessities." "Am I a prisoner, then?" Eleanor challenged. The guard's expression remained impassive. "I'm merely following orders, ma'am. The Major explained that your condition makes you unpredictable. For your own safety, you must remain under supervision." The pretense of medical concern provided convenient cover for what amounted to imprisonment. Eleanor recognized the futility of further argument and instead focused on observing and analyzing her situation, searching for weaknesses in their arrangements that might eventually be exploited. Dinner arrived, a simple meal of stew and bread, accompanied by a glass containing a cloudy liquid that Eleanor immediately recognized as laudanum. She ate the food, but accidentally spilled the drugged drink, earning a suspicious glare from her guard, but avoiding the sedative effects that would have left her vulnerable and insensible. As she prepared for bed, Eleanor contemplated her options. The immediate future appeared bleak: transportation to the Major's estate, followed by isolation under the guise of medical treatment for hysteria. Any attempt to communicate with the outside world would be prevented, any plea for help intercepted. Her only hope lay in the cryptic message from Isaac. The keeper of her mother's medallion might still be at Magnolia Plantation, might still have some means of affecting her situation, but who was this mysterious ally, and how could they possibly help her now? Sleep came fitfully, broken by the sounds of the inn and the constant awareness of the guard positioned outside her door. In the grey hours before dawn, Eleanor was roused by muted voices in the hallway, her guards conversing in urgent tones. She moved silently to the door, pressing her ear against the wood. "Captured near the Virginia border," one guard was saying. "The message arrived an hour ago." "Turner?" the other asked. "No, the girl, Mercy, but she revealed details about their planned route before they separated. Turner was heading toward the coast, aiming for a ship bound for Haiti. The colonel will want this information immediately." Already dispatched, a rider left for Charleston at first light. Eleanor stepped away from the door, processing this new development. Mercy captured, apparently revealing information about Isaac's escape route. But why would Isaac head for the coast when such points were heavily monitored? It contradicted everything she knew about successful escape strategies, which typically involved overland routes through less populated areas. Unless Mercy had provided false information, deliberately misdirecting the search away from Isaac's actual route. It would be a clever strategy. Sacrifice one piece of information to protect another, more valuable truth. Before Eleanor could consider further implications, the door opened abruptly. Her guard entered, expression suspicious. "Time to depart, ma'am. The Major expects us to make significant progress today." The second day of travel passed much like the first. Miles of monotonous countryside viewed through the carriage window, minimal conversation, regular stops to change horses and take brief meals. The guards maintained constant vigilance, never allowing Eleanor a moment of true privacy. As they crossed into Virginia late in the afternoon, the landscape changed, rolling hills giving way to more rugged terrain. The carriage turned onto a less traveled road, winding through dense forests that blocked the fading sunlight. "Where exactly is the Major's estate?" Eleanor inquired, attempting to gauge their location. "Near enough," the senior guard replied tersely. "We'll arrive tomorrow." Their accommodations that night were more primitive, a roadside tavern catering primarily to travelers of modest means. Eleanor's room was little more than a closet with a narrow bed, the walls thin enough that she could hear conversations from adjacent rooms and the common area below. After a sparse meal, Eleanor feigned exhaustion and retired early, pressing her ear to the wall, separating her room from the tavern's main room. Through the thin partition, she could discern fragments of conversation. Local farmers discussing crops, a merchant complaining about taxes, travelers exchanging information about road conditions. Then a voice cut through the general murmur, familiar though she couldn't immediately place it. Male, educated, with the distinctive cadence of Charleston's upper class. Eleanor shifted position, straining to hear more clearly. "Proceeding as planned," the voice was saying. "The distraction in Charleston has served its purpose admirably." Another voice responded, too low to distinguish words clearly. "Yes, all four reached the first safe house. Turner's information proved invaluable." Eleanor froze. They were discussing Isaac and the other escapees. But who were they? And what was their connection to events at Magnolia Plantation? The first voice continued. "The woman remains our primary concern. Her removal to Virginia complicates matters, but alternatives are being explored." The woman. Eleanor felt certain they were referring to her. But why would her transportation to Virginia concern them? Who were these people discussing her fate? A knock at her door interrupted her eavesdropping. The guard entered without waiting for permission, carrying a glass of water and what appeared to be medicine. "For your nerves," he explained gruffly. "The major's instructions." Eleanor recognized another attempt to sedate her. "I'm feeling much improved, thank you. I don't believe I need this tonight." The guard's expression hardened. "The major insisted you take your medicine regularly. For your health." The implied threat was clear. Eleanor realized that resistance would only result in forced administration, perhaps with violence. She accepted the glass and powder, waiting until the guard departed before pouring both into the chamber pot beneath her bed. Sleep eluded her that night as she replayed the fragments of conversation she'd overheard. Someone was monitoring the situation at Magnolia Plantation, someone with knowledge of Isaac's escape and apparent concern for Eleanor's welfare. The mysterious voices belonged to men of education and means, not the typical profile of those involved in the Underground Railroad. Morning brought a change in routine. As Eleanor prepared for another day of travel, her guards appeared unusually agitated, conferring in whispers and repeatedly checking the road visible from the tavern's small windows. "Is something amiss?" she inquired. "Nothing that concerns you," the senior guard replied, though his hand rested noticeably on his pistol. "We depart in 30 minutes. The tavern keeper delivered a simple breakfast, his manner deferential, but his eyes curious as they darted between Eleanor and her guards. He seemed about to speak several times, but ultimately withdrew without comment. As they finished the meal, the younger guard left to prepare the carriage. The senior guard remained, his attention focused on the window overlooking the road. "How much further to the major's estate?" Eleanor asked, attempting to gather information through casual conversation. "We'll arrive by nightfall." His response was clipped, distracted. A commotion outside drew his attention. Voices raised in alarm, the sound of running feet. The guard moved to the door, hand on his weapon, peering cautiously into the hallway. "Stay here," he ordered Eleanor. "Do not attempt to leave this room." The moment he stepped into the hallway, Eleanor moved to the window. Outside, a crowd had gathered around what appeared to be an injured traveler sprawled in the dusty road. Blood stained the man's shirt, his horse pacing nervously nearby. The guard emerged from the tavern, pushing through the crowd to assess the situation. In that moment of distraction, the door to Eleanor's room opened silently. She turned, expecting the younger guard, but instead faced a stranger, a well-dressed gentleman whose features registered as vaguely familiar, though she couldn't immediately place him. "Mrs. Blackwood," he whispered urgently, "we have little time. You must come with me now." Eleanor stepped back, suspicious. "Who are you?" "A friend of Isaac Turner's," the man replied, "and the keeper of your mother's medallion." He withdrew from his pocket the silver locket Eleanor had thought stolen months earlier. The sight of it, tangible proof of Isaac's message, momentarily stunned her. "How did you—" "Questions later," he interrupted. "Your guard will return momentarily. We must go now if you wish to escape the Major's hospitality." Despite her uncertainty, Eleanor recognized this might be her only opportunity. She gathered her shawl and followed the stranger into the hallway, where a second man waited, the owner of the educated voice she'd overheard the previous night. "Quickly," the second man urged, gesturing toward a narrow servants' staircase at the rear of the building. "The diversion will occupy them for only a few minutes." They descended the stairs and exited through the kitchen, where the tavern keeper nodded briefly to them before returning to his work, clearly complicit in whatever plan was unfolding. Behind the tavern stood a modest carriage, its plain appearance designed to attract minimal attention. The first man helped Eleanor inside, while the second took the driver's position. "Stay low and out of sight," her rescuer instructed, pulling a blanket over her as he joined her in the carriage. "We must clear the area before your absence is discovered." The carriage moved forward at a deliberate pace, neither too fast to draw attention nor too slow to make effective distance. Eleanor remained hidden beneath the blanket, her mind racing with questions and uncertainties. After what seemed an eternity, but was likely only 15 or 20 minutes, the carriage increased speed. The man beside her removed the blanket, allowing Eleanor to sit up and observe their surroundings. They had turned onto a narrow forest track, well away from the main road. "I believe introductions are in order," the man said, offering a slight bow from his seated position. "Jonathan Livingston, at your service. My companion driving the carriage is Dr. William Foster. We are both members of a certain committee that operates throughout the southern states." "Abolitionists," Eleanor surmised. Livingston smiled thinly. "We prefer to think of ourselves as humanitarians, though the distinction matters little to those who would see us hanged. How did you know about my situation? About the medallion?" "Isaac Turner is an exceptional man," Livingston replied. "When he rejected your original escape plan, he didn't abandon the idea entirely. He improved upon it. Recognizing the risk to you if he simply disappeared, he developed a more comprehensive strategy." "The murders," Eleanor said quietly. "Were they part of his strategy as well?" Livingston's expression darkened. "Absolutely not. Those killings complicated everything, created a climate of fear and heightened security that nearly ruined months of careful planning. We still don't know who was responsible, though we have suspicions." "The Major," Eleanor suggested. "He arrived too conveniently, seemed too prepared for events as they unfolded." "An astute observation," Livingston acknowledged. "Thomas Blackwood has certain investments that benefit significantly from the current system. Any disruption threatens his financial interests. Creating the appearance of a violent slave conspiracy would justify increased restrictions, greater surveillance, harsher punishments, all advantageous to his position." The carriage turned again, following a path barely visible among the trees. Eleanor tried to orient herself, but found it impossible in the unfamiliar terrain. "Where are you taking me?" "To safety initially," Livingston answered. "Beyond that, decisions must be made. Your position is complicated." "Because I'm a Blackwood," Eleanor stated flatly. "Precisely. The wife of a prominent plantation owner, suddenly vanishing in the company of known abolitionists, raises implications beyond your personal situation. Actions against you would be interpreted as actions against the entire plantation system, potentially triggering reprisals against others in our network." The carriage continued through the forest for hours, eventually emerging onto a wider track that showed signs of regular use. As twilight approached, they reached a modest farmhouse set back from the road, surrounded by fields of corn and wheat. Dr. Foster, who had maintained silence throughout the journey, finally spoke as he helped Eleanor from the carriage. "This is one of our safe houses. You'll remain here until arrangements can be finalized for your onward journey." The farmhouse interior was simple but comfortable, its furnishings reflecting practical rural life rather than urban sophistication. A middle-aged woman greeted them warmly, introducing herself as Martha before showing Eleanor to a small bedroom on the second floor. "You'll be safe here," Martha assured her. "My husband and I have sheltered many travelers on their journey north." "North?" Eleanor repeated. "Is that where I'm to go?" Martha exchanged glances with Livingston. "That decision remains yours, Mrs. Blackwood. But options in the south are limited for someone in your position." After a simple dinner, during which conversation remained focused on immediate practicalities rather than larger questions, Livingston finally addressed Eleanor's future directly. "We can arrange passage to Philadelphia," he explained, "where associates will help establish you with a new identity. Your education and refinement would make you well suited for a position as a tutor or companion to a respectable family." The reality of her situation struck Eleanor with sudden force. She was now a fugitive, not merely from her husband's authority, but from the legal system that would view her assistance to Isaac as criminal. There would be no return to her former life, no reconciliation with the society she had known. "And Isaac?" she asked. "Did he reach safety?" Livingston's expression softened. "Isaac Turner and 3 others crossed into Pennsylvania 4 days ago. They are currently recuperating at a safe house outside Philadelphia, preparing for the next phase of their journey." Relief washed through Eleanor, momentarily overshadowing her personal concerns. "And Mercy, I heard she was captured." "False information," Dr. Foster interjected, "deliberately circulated to misdirect pursuit. Mercy was among the group that crossed with Isaac." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, absorbing this news. "The journal mentioned by the marshal, the one supposedly linking me to your organization, was that genuine?" Livingston shook his head. "Pure fabrication. The major needed evidence to justify your removal, and such a journal provided convenient proof of your involvement. You were never directly connected to our committee before now. Though your sympathy toward Isaac was noted, Doctor," Foster added. "He spoke highly of your kindness, your growing disillusionment with the plantation system." Eleanor considered her transformation from colonel's wife to fugitive, from passive observer of injustice to active participant in resistance. The path ahead remained uncertain, fraught with dangers both practical and philosophical. In crossing this threshold, she had separated herself irrevocably from her past. "There's something else you should know," Livingston said quietly. "News reached Charleston yesterday that might affect your decision." Eleanor tensed. "What news?" "The bodies of 2 men were discovered in the swamp near Magnolia Plantation. One has been identified as Timothy Wilson, the magistrate's clerk, reportedly murdered days earlier." "Reportedly?" Eleanor echoed. "The initial murder was staged. The body presented to authorities was not Wilson's, but that of an unknown white man altered to resemble him. The deception provided cover for Wilson's actual activities, removing evidence implicating certain parties in illegal slave trading." "And the second body?" Livingston hesitated. "Harlan Bates, your husband's overseer. His death was also staged initially, though in this case he appears to have been genuinely murdered after the fact, perhaps to eliminate a witness." "Erdrey!" The implications staggered Eleanor. The murders that had created such panic, that had accelerated the search for Isaac and the others, that had ultimately led to her own incrimination, were elaborate deceptions, orchestrated for purposes still not entirely clear. Who would benefit from such machinations? She wondered aloud. "Those who profit from chaos and fear," Dr. Foster suggested. "Those whose interests are served by heightened security, increased patrols, stricter enforcement of fugitive slave laws." "The Major," Eleanor concluded, "and others like him." The revelation cast her husband's brother in an even more sinister light. Not merely a cruel slave owner, but a manipulator willing to orchestrate murders to protect his financial interests and political position. "The colonel, your husband," Livingston said carefully, "is not blameless in this affair. Evidence suggests he was aware of his brother's broader activities, if not the specific details of recent events." Eleanor nodded slowly, unsurprised. James Blackwood had never been a gentleman, but in recent years his brutality had increased alongside his ambitions. The plantation system had not merely accommodated his darker impulses, it had nurtured and rewarded them. "What happens now?" she asked. "Tomorrow, you'll be moved to another location," Dr. Foster explained. "From there, we'll arrange your journey north in stages, using established routes and trusted contacts. The process typically takes several weeks, depending on conditions and security concerns. And my identity, my future, both will require careful construction," Livingston replied. "Your accent marks you as Southern, your mannerisms as gentry. These can be advantages or liabilities, depending on how they're presented. We'll provide documentation identifying you as a widow from Maryland, traveling north to join relatives after your husband's death." The fiction felt surreal, yet necessary. A new narrative to replace the life that no longer existed. Eleanor would become someone else, would build a new existence from the remnants of her old identity. "There is another option," Dr. Foster said quietly. "One that carries significant risk, but might serve a greater purpose." Eleanor raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Return to Charleston, not as Eleanor Blackwood, but as a witness. Provide testimony about the Major's activities, the fabricated murders, the manufactured evidence. Such revelations, coming from someone of your position, could expose corruption that extends beyond a single plantation." The suggestion momentarily took Eleanor's breath away. Return to the very society that now viewed her as a criminal or madwoman. Face not only legal jeopardy, but the very real possibility of violence from those whose interests would be threatened by her testimony. "The risks would be enormous," Livingston acknowledged, reading her expression, "but so too would be the potential impact. The system relies on silence, the silence of the enslaved through terror, the silence of sympathizers through social pressure, the silence of witnesses through bribery or intimidation. Breaking that silence," Dr. Foster added, "even briefly, creates ripples that extend far beyond a single testimony." Eleanor considered the proposition, weighing personal safety against potential impact. The woman she had been 15 years ago, the naive bride who had accepted plantation life without question, would have chosen safety without hesitation. But that woman no longer existed. "I need time to consider," she finally said. "Of course," Livingston agreed. "This is not a decision to be made hastily or under duress. Rest tonight. We can discuss options further tomorrow." Left alone in the small bedroom, Eleanor stood by the window, gazing at stars visible through breaks in the cloud cover. Somewhere to the south, Magnolia Plantation continued its rhythms. Cotton growing, profits accumulating, human beings laboring under the lash and the constant threat of separation from family and loved ones. Somewhere to the north, Isaac Turner and his companions were beginning new lives, facing different challenges but breathing air untainted by legal bondage. And here, in this liminal space between her past and future, Eleanor Blackwood contemplated choices that would define not only her remaining years, but potentially influence the larger struggle against an institution that corrupted everything it touched, slaves and masters alike. The path forward remained unclear, fraught with dangers both known and unforeseen. But for the first time since her marriage at 17, Eleanor felt something long absent from her life, the power of genuine choice, born not from privilege but from the conscious decision to reject complicity in a system built on human suffering. Whatever she decided, whether to vanish into northern anonymity or return to Charleston as a witness against corruption, she would do so not as the colonel's wife, but as her own woman, guided by a moral compass that had finally found its true north. As dawn broke over the Virginia countryside, Eleanor made her decision. The journey ahead would be neither safe nor certain, but it would be hers to navigate according to her conscience. In that knowledge, despite all that had been lost, she found an unexpected measure of freedom,